Welcome to the Niche Pursuits podcast. Today we're joined by Greg Elfrink, who is the head of marketing over at Empire Flippers. Greg's been with them since 2016. He was employee number 4 on the way in. So he has been along on quite a ride in the website acquisition and the website sales space. We have a treat because we get to just bend his ear and pick and prod to get a lot of tips and tricks for you. He talks about buying websites. We center around due diligence. We center around how to evaluate websites, which types of sites to go after. Obviously, he's got a lot of experience in terms of seeing what it looks like for people to buy websites. We also talk about selling websites. We talk about what it looks like to sell a website, why you need to have some flexibility built in. And he goes through some of the things that sellers should do as they prepare to sell their website. He underscores actually how growth is not as important or vital as I thought it was. He actually kind of uncovers some really fascinating points about what growth looks like for a website and how buyers might not be as excited about growth as you think. They're actually looking for some other things in your website. We kind of round it all up or tie a bow on it by talking about the asset flywheel approach that Greg has popularized. And this is really about wealth accumulation. I guess as SEOs or as content builders, it's so easy to get really myopic, to get really focused about the project we have, about the website we have, about the specifics. And Greg is really good at laying out a strategy that he calls the asset flywheel. And this strategy is all about how to build wealth, long-term wealth, using websites, using these web assets. And so he goes through it and then it talks through some different angles to look at it from and kind of poke some holes in some of the things that might get in the way of it. So if you're a website builder and someone who is looking for a strategy that you can use, a long-term strategy, this is a really great episode. If you're just someone who's interested in buying and selling websites and want to get some tips and tricks from someone who's on the ground and sees a lot of sites come and go, this is a great episode. So all in all, really great to have Greg on. He's a popular figure in the website community, and it was a real treat to just interview him. So enjoy. All right, and welcome to the Niche Pursuits podcast. My name is Jared Bauman, and today we have the pleasure of being joined by Greg Elfrink. Greg, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I was just talking to you offline. This is kind of like a full circle thing because I used to read Niche Pursuits and listen to Spencer on this podcast back when I was doing the oil field days. So it's cool being on here.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm the same way. I started off with Niche Pursuits by listening to the podcast and reading, and then one thing leads to another, and here I am. So kind of a fortuitous meetup, I suppose.
For sure.
So, you're with Empire Flippers. I'll let you give your background on your history with Empire Flippers, and then we'll set the stage with where we're going today. But Empire Flippers comes up a lot on this podcast as we talk about buying and selling digital assets, website building, website creation, and all that. So it's really going to be fun and a treat to have you on because we've got some really cool topics that we're going to discuss, and you've just got so many unique insights to share with us. So give us some background because I know that, you were early on in the Empire Flipper days and probably have a lot of history there.
Yeah, sure. So April will be 6 years at EF. So I sometimes jokingly call myself Grandpa Empire with my team. I was employee number 4. Now we've just crossed over 100 employees. I think we're like 102 employees. So crazy growth over the years. When I first came on board in 2016, a big site, like a really big business, would be like $150,000. And I remember our CEO, Joe, one of the co-founders, telling me like, Greg, once it gets this big, it just takes a whole different process to sell, right? And now, like last week, we just listed a $30 million business on our marketplace. So times have changed. What's big for us? But yeah, I'm the head of marketing. I see a lot of stuff. My background is SEO and content marketing. So hopefully between the M&A knowledge and the SEO stuff, I'll be able to add a lot of value to the audience.
Have you, do you have a background in website building? You said you have an SEO background, but what do you have any, before you got to Empire Flippers, do you have any background in websites?
Yeah, no, not really. So I used to be an oil field roughneck in the Arctic Circle of Alaska. I also worked in Gulf of Mexico and North Dakota for a long time, and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. And I would discover people like Spencer talking about this other stuff called affiliate marketing. Spencer wasn't my first encounter with the concept, but he was one of the people I hung on to because a lot of there's a lot of predatory gurus in the space, as you probably know, right, Jared? So Spencer obviously wasn't one of them, so that's why I kept following him. I tried a lot of different stuff. Self-taught, bought a bunch of courses, did my own experiments. I even had an SEO agency, and since I couldn't cold call people, one, I hated cold calling, but two, I was also working 12 to 18 hours a day on the oil rig, so it wasn't like I didn't have enough time to cold call someone. Instead, I would run these ads in my local town and Facebook. And when they landed on my thank you page, like they opted into my landing page, I would have just a simple video of me there. And I would say, these are like chiropractors, right? Chiropractors, dentists, that kind of business. And I'd say, you probably get 10 to maybe even more calls from people like me every single day trying to sell you SEO. So why should you even listen to me? Well, first off, I got you here because I used internet marketing and they didn't.
Yep.
And that converted pretty well for me. Nothing ever came of it because I was so new. I didn't know what to do. Once I did get clients, but that's kind of my background. I was just like messing around, a lot of failure, and eventually I started writing SEO content for people because I was like, well, what can I do successfully? And I was a really fast writer, and I knew SEOs needed content, and they absolutely hate creating content. So I became the cheapest content writer around. This is back when PBNs were still really, really
Mm.
mainstream. And so I started off writing PBN articles for people at a half a cent per word.
Oh
And I
my.
that led up to my portfolio. Yeah, I wrote so many articles about plumbing in Ohio or roofing in Perth.
Yes.
And then one of my clients, he found out I was still on the oil rig during all of this. He's like, "Oh man, if I was you, I'd be so burned out. I mean, you've written like 80 articles for me this month, plus doing all this." I'm like, man, I've been burned out for years. Doesn't mean you stop going. You still got bills to pay, right? So that eventually led to EF. And one of the really funny things, I'm sure your audience knows Matt Diggity. So Diggity and I we're pretty close friends as well nowadays. But now and again, especially early on in my career, he would start talking about this website he wants to sell with us, and he would say like one or two words like, is it this website? He's like, how do you know that? Like, oh, I wrote all the content. That agency you hired just farmed it out to me.
I love how you said you started the question by saying, no, I don't really have, I've never really had a website, but yet you have experience in almost everything that's involved in website building through the years and good
That's
stories.
fair. That's fair.
How did you land at EF? I mean, how did Empire Flippers come into the fold? I mean, without having a website, you've had an agency, you've done SEO writing, you've been very involved in the history of link building, certainly. But I mean, where did you end up landing? I'll leave it at that. But
Yeah, yeah.
where did you end up landing at Empire Flippers with?
Like I said, I hated the oil field. I tried to always get a marketing job because I love marketing. I've always been passionate about it. For like to me, I've always identified, and this sounds weird, but I've identified as an artist. Like I write novels for fun, and I view marketing as kind of like the most applied form of art. So I've always wanted to be involved with it. But since I had no college education, I was all self-taught. I would get filtered out by just like software, basically. And so I saw this email from EF, and at this point, I had like taken my gritty determinism from writing all these PBN articles, and then eventually like ebooks and even ghostwriting as some famous SEOs to build my own affiliate site. I'm like, I'm going to build this thing if it kills me, you know? Like, and then I saw this email come out from EF. Hey, we're looking for a content marketing pro. And I immediately thought, well, there's a job I don't qualify for. Time to get rejected. I
Yep.
applied. And I had the interview with Justin, which was a really intense interview. Your audience knows Justin. He's a very good debater, and very good at like asking questions, like very, very aggressive sometimes. It puts you off of your feet. But so after that interview, I just thought like, man, I totally got destroyed in this interview. And I just got done working my 12-hour shift too. So it's like on top of the 12-hour shift that he rejected in this interview. But I got the second interview. I was like really shocked. Like Justin reached out to me. He's like, "Hey, we're going to do another interview. This time, both co-founders are going to be on." And I was like, "Oh shit, that's crazy! I've never made it this far in anything." And then he, like, as the call began, this is before Zoom, so we're still using Skype. Justin sent me like this private message on Skype, like, "Hey man, make sure you don't donk this up in front of my CEO." Like, oh god, no pressure. But yeah, so a couple weeks go by and I get this email from Justin. It looks like this canned response where like, okay, I definitely got rejected. But at the end, he's basically like, just kidding, you're coming to Vietnam. Like, oh my God.
Wow. And so that was the process.
That was the process. Yeah. But I remember I had the best boss I ever had in the oil field, which is like a legitimately nice guy, which there's not very many in the oil field. There's a lot of hard cases in the oil field, as you might imagine, right? And I told him what I was going to go do, and he was really excited because he knew about my passion on marketing. But then I told him where I was going. He's like, "Greg, is this a real? Is this real?"
I bet there aren't many people who have gone from the oil fields to marketing for a company.
Yeah, it's not exactly the most normal transitions for sure.
Well, congratulations. I mean, you've been on quite the ride ever since then. I guess we're now recording this in early 2022. So what does that put us at, maybe 6 years or 6+
Yeah,
years? And
April
um,
April 4th will be 6 years. I have a terrible memory. The only date I can remember is my first day at EF when I first arrived in Vietnam, because that's when my life changed. When finally all the promises of online business came true for me.
came true for you, man. It's like a Cinderella story here. So
Yeah,
it's gonna
yeah.
be hard to top that in the rest of the show here. But I mean, I guess let me set the stage for some of the things we're going to talk about here. Obviously, buying and selling online businesses I mean, it's just, I feel like it's a buzzword right now. It's so much more ubiquitous. It's so much more common. It's so the multiples have gone up so much, and yet I feel like when I tell my friends or my family what it is I'm doing or these opportunities that exist, they kind of look at me like, "Are you kidding me? People buy websites." So, talk maybe to frame the conversation that we're going to have about buying and selling business. Talk about this. I don't want to say dichotomy that exists, but almost the burgeoning market we have here. Yet the fact that so few people necessarily, when you look at it from the bigger picture, know exactly what's going on.
Mhm. Yeah, so a lot of my friends were like this before EF, and now a lot of my like fellow oil buddies, they go, like, "Wait, what's up, Zuckerberg?" Because they see me like speaking on a stage or something, right? So I think that is a hallmark of where we are at with our industry. Like, one, still very niche. A lot of people don't know or understand. Like, most people don't even know it exists, right? Like, they don't think anything of it, that they're on an affiliate website. Like, one of my I was in San Francisco with visiting a good buddy of mine, and he was looking at this like indoor plant blog, and I'm like, oh, I know that person, runs that website, but like they're not thinking of it in that way, right?
Right.
It's very similar to like Amazon. People who shop on Amazon don't realize like there's like millions of different individual small business owners being represented on there. It's not just Amazon, right? So one that says we're very early. To your other question, why it's becoming such a buzz is my industry. So my little niche within a niche within a niche of an industry, right? Of selling and buying businesses, online businesses, is always going to lag behind what's hot, because in
Mm,
order for them to come to me, what's hot has to have matured into a profitable business, right? And so now what we're seeing is all of these different business models that were pretty new back in 2016. Like, even if like general affiliate marketing was still relatively new coming into its own, now they're all starting to mature into these assets. Like, we just sold I think last year, I think we sold 3 7-figure KDP publishing businesses. I
wow.
mean, even people in our space don't know about that, right?
Mhm,
Like, that's not like on their radar.
mhm.
But there's these huge modern day publishing houses, you have teams of ghostwriters creating whole pen names and universes that we've sold the IP rights to those companies, right? So I think we're just seeing the market, basically our market specifically, catching up to, oh yeah, all this stuff that I'm using to make bank is actually valuable. It's a valuable asset. Like, people are starting to realize what they've built is valuable.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about, but where do you want to start? You want to talk about buying businesses, or do you want to talk about selling businesses? Which one do you think we should start with?
I'm good with either or. I know we want to talk about the asset flywheel at the end, and that kind of
Yeah.
combines both. So
Good. Well, let's talk about buying businesses, because I'd love to get your thoughts and tips for people who are interested in buying businesses. Obviously, with your knowledge of the inside workings of Empire Flippers and the way that you guys evaluate things, what you guys see in terms of multiples. Um, we want to land on this asset flywheel approach that you've shared. I watched the YouTube video on it. We'll include a link to that in the show notes so
Appreciate
that
it.
yeah, so people can kind of get the details of it because you go into depth on it. But let's talk about the process of buying businesses, especially as it relates to this asset building approach, and then any tips or insights you can share along the way.
Sure. So I will start off with the newbie tips because I imagine most people haven't on listening haven't bought a business, and these are good tips even if you have to a certain degree. So the first thing I would say is understanding things like your acquisition capital and working capital. So a lot of people when they first start off looking at buying a business, they just think of like, okay, this is my budget. So say my budget is I don't know 500 or like $600,000 is my budget, right? A lot of people are like, okay, I can buy a business up to $600,000. But the problem with this thinking is you're not thinking what happens after the acquisition, right? If you only have $600,000 and you buy a $600,000 business, means you have no capital to help you on a rainy day, right? So that's the first thing is understand that there's two categories to your budget you need. And the reason why you want to have working capital, and I recommend 20% of whatever the sales price of the business is. And that's like a general rule of thumb. It doesn't have to be that. That's just my number. And that will help you in a rainy day. So let's say you bought a $400,000 SEO website, right? And then a Google penalty happens and say you're brand new to SEO. If 400K was the only money you had, like you're kind of screwed with what options you have. Versus if you had like an extra $40,000 set aside to help you on that, okay, I can go hire an SEO consultant that I trust. Like I have enough to do that. I have enough to run these experiments, or find someone who is on the cutting edge to come help me out, and or pay for new links or whatever, pay for new content optimization, all that stuff. So it gives you that liquidity. And I tell people all the time, if business was a game of chess, that your king is like your net profit, right? You want to protect it at all costs,
Mm.
but your queen is your liquidity. And in the game of chess, the queen makes all the winning moves. So if you want to be you want to create that margin for error. And that's like the other thing that entrepreneurs often screw up a little bit. They want to go too fast, too big, too soon. If you just slow it down and you bake in margin of failure, you're going to do a lot better. And the other thing to add on to that is taking that budget. So again, let's say you have $600,000 and you're brand new to buying a business. You just split that into thirds. So 200, 200, 200, and then 20K, 20K, 20K for your working capital, right? So you can buy a business up to $200,000. And the reason why you do that is the first business you buy, you'll probably make a lot of mistakes. And you know this, Jared. Like entrepreneurship is filled with failures all the time. Even if everything's going good, you're failing most of the time, and it's like a lesson, right? So you don't want to use up all your capital right away. And like if you use a broker like us, for example, you're probably not going to fail on the actual acquisition side, but like our relationship, like it continues, but we don't help you run the business, right? That's really up to you, and that's where a lot of that failure can happen. So this allows you, as long as you do the other thing I'm about to say, when you go up to your second business, you're going to make less mistakes. And by the time you get to the third business, you're really going to know what's going on. And that last thing to make sure that happens, my last tip here is don't listen to people that say, I need to diversify, so therefore buy many different business models. That's a really bad move
Mm.
if you're brand new, because like SEO, Amazon FBA, KDP, these are all extremely different business models with extremely different flywheels that you need to understand to operate and scale. So don't stack the deck against you by buying three different business models. Buy the same business model every time with just different brands as your diversity is what I would recommend. So that way you do master the business model.
Yeah, your story, it almost cuts me a little bit, but I have a friend
Oh
who
no.
no, it's good. Thankfully it didn't happen to me, but a friend bought we're talking about real estate, but bought a piece of real estate, I think an apartment complex or a warehouse or something. And day one or, first month or very quickly, found out that it was, had a slab leak and had all major
Mm,
foundation issues, but had spent the bulk of his cash on the acquisition. And needless to say, it was a very painful situation that wouldn't have been painful, would have been momentarily painful if he had had the
right.
cash in reserve. So that's what came to mind when you talked about that. And obviously, the world of online business, it is volatile. It does have volatility to it. So that's really good thought. That's really good thought. So you are almost recommending a diversified approach in acquisition, right? Is that kind of what I heard you say? Kind of split that up and try to diversify it. Are you maybe to drill a little deeper? you gave that example of taking 600K and dividing up into 200, 200, 200. So would you say to kind of buy that first business and then wait a while for you to make the
Mm,
mistakes and then
yeah,
start moving forward,
yeah.
or kind of go at it at the same time, trusting that you'll learn fast enough that, 2 to 3 might work out or something?
So obviously it depends on your risk, like what your like risk tolerance is, right? If you have a high risk tolerance, you could do that. I probably wouldn't recommend that if you're brand new, just because like give yourself some time to breathe and scale that first thing and get to understand the system before you get to the next one. Would be what I would recommend. To answer your other part, I don't always actually recommend the splitting budgets into thirds. I do recommend it for people who are starting out. I think once you
Beginners,
become
right?
more, yeah, once you become more advanced and you understand what's going on, I actually think you're better served buying a bigger business than a smaller business because they tend to have a lot more staying power, a lot more stability as you get bigger. So $1 million content site is going to be a lot less volatile than a 50K website, right? And there's a lot more opportunities from both revenue and traffic potential with that $1 million website than there is with the 50K website because you can translate all that SEO to email. You can diversify into your own e-commerce products or even SaaS products. I've seen it happen both ways with a site that started off as an affiliate site, right? So as you get more advanced, I actually recommend buying a bigger business, but I do recommend splitting it up when you're first starting out.
So when you're going to buy a business, like you talked about, whether it's your first time or not, what are some of the things that you have seen make it easier for people to evaluate? Because one of the most common things that I hear and that I see people talking about when they're buying their first business, specifically a first website, is how overwhelming it is and how it's hard to cut through the noise, right? Like you guys send out an email every Monday and it's got 18 listings and maybe 5 or 6 of them meet my budget range. And how do I
Mm.
evaluate those 5 or 6 and compare it up against the 5 or 6 from last week? And any tips you have on kind of how to cut through the noise and do some due diligence to help land on something you can kind of process through?
Sure. So this is a very good question, and this is also going to be very personal to each individual. So I'll explain it as a framework. So we actually call this the due diligence framework. So the best way to do this, in my experience, is basically have a series of checklists. So your first checklist is like your top, like your broadest criteria, more or less, right? But this should still be specific enough where you can disqualify a business in about 5 minutes of looking at it. So it might be,
Hmm.
like niche, budget, like the one you just said. Budget is often something that should be on the very first checklist, right? And you're going through all of that. Like, it must have, you must be in this niche or can't be in this niche, must be this budget. It must have this many pages ranking on the first page of Google. So not all is like, so that way it's not just like 2 pages is driving the majority of the traffic, right? Things like this. And it should be a very quick checklist for you, and like if it doesn't have that, you already know you would not want it, right? So you can just disqualify that business. So you want to create a system that allows you to disqualify as quickly as possible so you can get to the real opportunities as quickly as possible before someone else gets to it before you, right? And
Mm.
that's how buyers make buying decisions very, very quickly. Like we sold, there's I won't mention his name because I can't legally, but we sold a guy's business who your audience might even know for $1 million in 24 hours. And and it was all cash. It was an all cash offer affiliate website that this
I
guy
know who you're
bought.
talking about.
Yeah, he was very happy with the situation. But like the reason why something like that can happen is because that buyer most likely, I don't know if this for sure in this specific situation, but that buyer most likely had that framework already. So in
Right.
this case, you have that first checklist, you can disqualify really quick. Enough of the checks get hit, you move to the second checklist that allows you to go deeper. And this might be something like looking deeper into Hrefs, Google Analytics, if you have access, like you access at it to make sure the traffic is real. That's very important, especially if you're buying any website underneath $100,000, because that's where most of the internet scams live, is in that $100,000 and below range, because it's so easy to fake the numbers, right? Versus like the $1 million site, you have less to worry about. So it can happen. So you should still know how to do it, obviously. But it's just rarer once you get bigger. But so look at that kind of stuff. Maybe that checklist also has some stuff on like, potential things you want to see. For example, no email list, or if there is an email list, maybe that's part of your second checklist. And then usually there's a third checklist, and that third checklist is where you really requires you to talk to the person. Like, this is the checklist. Like, the other two checklists can probably be done without talking to the seller, but the
Mhm.
third one is most likely like, all right, I need these like extreme specific questions answered for me that Ahrefs isn't going to tell me, Google Analytics isn't going to tell me, only really the seller can tell me, right? And that's how I would go about it. Let's have that series of checklists.
That's a really, man. If people could just take notes on that alone, I think they get tons of value out of today. And
Oh,
yeah, you're
good.
right. It's
I succeeded.
well, I think you hit upon a great point. Like, it's fascinating sometimes where I know for myself, having an interest in buying and selling, I'll get the email, and I'll still be making breakfast for my kids or having my cup of coffee, and by the time I click through on a listing that looks good, later in the day, sometimes it's gone, and it always
Yeah,
it always
yeah,
blows my mind. How can that happen so quickly? And I think you're exactly right. That list of criteria or untouchables or must-haves, or whatever you want to call it, is really good. And then you can quickly move on from sites that don't meet that criteria.
for sure. I feel most people they say something similar to what you said, right? Which you didn't say it, but you kind of hinted at, like this feeling of overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
If you have a checklist, it makes everything simple. It makes everything black and white, right? So that is a very powerful way. And I'm not trying to be promotional here, but if your audience wants to do this, they could register for our account and like with Empire Flippers and just set up the filters that they want. So they could log in every Monday and
Oh.
see those specific filters, right? So they don't need to look at the newsletter if they didn't want to. They can get alerts, watch times, all that stuff. So that's why we design our back end, actually, is on this idea of due diligence checklist. So we try to design the filters around what a buyer might want as their criteria.
Hmm. I did not know that. That's a good little tip. I will stop paying attention to the emails. I'm just kidding.
No, please. I like to see the
I was
open
going to
rates
say,
on those.
you're
Please,
in
please
marketing. We
open and
want
click
those.
everything. Click
Yeah.
everything.
Want to keep those open rates up. Let's be honest here. Well, let's transition. I feel like we could camp there all day, but let's talk about the sales side. And
Sure.
that might intrigue our listeners a bit more. I don't want to say for certain because there's such a wide audience, but certainly I will say there's a lot of people that are building probably content sites, probably on the back of SEO, and have the idea of selling that site someday. And so maybe let's start with the same question, from your perspective as someone who sees so many sites come through, many of them rejected from Empire Flippers. I'm guessing because they aren't the type of site you guys want to sell, and then obviously seeing a lot of sites get put up and listed but not sold, and probably the majority of the sites you guys do take on listed and sold. Like, talk us through some of the details and some of the important factors for selling a website.
Sure. So we do reject the vast majority of businesses that come our way, regardless of business models. So I think the number is 94% of businesses that get submitted to us is rejected. So
Wow.
you're in the club of 6%, right? Once you get listed. But yeah, I mean, the reasons why we reject is typically nothing nefarious. Actually, is usually either doesn't meet our minimum requirements, which are actually quite low. For an affiliate website, we're still anything that's a 12-month average of $500 a month or more can still be very acceptable by us. Even though we do sell much bigger websites, we still do sell the smaller websites. People sometimes think we don't, but it's because they just go so quick, like
It
you
goes
said,
so
like a
quick.
few hours.
And I think you guys didn't used to, right? Didn't you lower your minimum threshold at some point, or has it always been that low?
So we may have lowered it. I don't remember us ever lowering it. Maybe
Okay.
like right before I came on board, we did, but it's always been pretty stable there. We did raise up the other business models though. So
Okay.
the other business models used to be 500, but now they're at 1,000. So still not very much. Like
Maybe that
the
was it.
minimum
Yeah.
thresholds are not terrible to reach. But usually why a website would be rejected is because of red flags or doesn't meet our minimum threshold, or which this can be also common is the valuation we give just isn't good for the seller, right? A lot of times sellers, and this happens very often for first time sellers, their business, in their mind, they overvalue it significantly because if you have this successful affiliate website that's spitting off cash and you're spending like, say, like I have some friends that are making 30K a month on a website they're spending 2 hours every other week on, right? And it allows them to do this crazy stuff with their life, geo arbitrage, travel, spend time with their family at home without a commute, all this stuff, right? So it creates this emotional, what I call emotional equity in the business, where you're valuing the business much more
Mm,
than what the buyer is going to value. So when you come to us, we kind of beat you down on that expectation. And it's very important we beat down a seller on that expectation, because if they go privately thinking like, oh, whatever, like EF gave me a bad valuation. If they go privately and then buyers start really lowballing them, what I've seen happen usually is people with emotional equity, they will eventually get to this point where like, oh my God, I'm so tired of this process. Yes, just get this website away from me. And they'll say yes
mm,
to the buyer's offer. But the buyer's offer is actually significantly lower than what the valuation we would have, because the seller truly doesn't know what they're worth. So
right.
that's a major issue I see. But as far as your other part of your question, someone who gets listed and doesn't sell. I actually just did a YouTube video about this. That'll be coming out soon, of like what to do if buyers aren't interested, and that happens, right? Even on our marketplace, like we have a buyer network with over $5 billion in verified liquidity, but that doesn't mean you're a guaranteed sell. I mean, the vast majority of businesses listed on there we do sell. But you might be one of those people that take a little bit longer, or maybe even
Mhm.
doesn't sell. A couple of reasons why that could happen is lack of flexibility is a big one. So say you have a $200,000 affiliate website you're trying to sell, and someone offers you $180,000, and to you that's just a complete no. You might be too rigid on what you want, depending on what kind of offers you're getting. Right, it's always relative to that. But if you want to make the absolute most money from your exit, you also might need to accept that you might have a longer earnout of some sort. Or if you want to get the most cash up front, you might need to be flexible on your sales price, right? To come down to get that all that upfront amount. So flexibility is a big key. Being coachable, being active. Surprisingly, sometimes sellers are not very active when
Hmm.
they want to sell the business. Like we
They're
just
already
had
done.
the yeah. We had this situation recently where with a guy who had a 7-figure business selling with us, and literally no one, like he had like 2 offers on the table that were pretty solid, and no one could get a hold of him. I even reached out to him on Facebook, nothing. And then like I see him later on in a group talking about us, like what? What? So like, we tried. So that stuff like that happens,
Yeah.
So that's another thing, seller responsiveness and coachability, I guess. But yeah, usually those are the kind of issues. Usually it's like flexibility on price or terms is can keep you from buyers being interested in you.
So going back to the real estate analogy, you know, there's buying a good home, there's having a home, and then there's selling your home. And the things you need to do to get your home ready for sale are different than the things you do to live in your home, right?
Mhm.
And I won't go too far down the analogy, but following the analogy, share some tips that you guys that you see or that are commonly missed when site owners haven't prepared their site for a sale. And we've talked a lot on this podcast before about how to think long term about selling your business down the road, but maybe more of a, I'll call it short term, some things that are missed and some things that help the valuation number and help make it more attractive for someone to buy, so they don't end up in that situation where they're either being too rigid, too inflexible, or just somebody's just not interested in it.
Sure. So one of the real benefits, like specifically for affiliate marketing websites, is there's a lot less you got to prepare versus say like an e-commerce store. So
Mm,
as far as headaches goes, one of the smoother transactions for you as a seller, which is really nice. But there are a few things you still need to do, right? For example, verifying your traffic, making sure that all looks good. Cutting down any experimental marketing, which is rarer in the affiliate space, I'd say, than e-commerce, but it still happens. Like it's a probably a bad idea if in 12 months you're planning on selling the website to go and experiment with a brand new link building agency you've never tried out before, right? That's not probably the safest move for you. And as you get closer to the time of sell, you should really be cutting off anything that isn't core to the business, really be focusing on just maintaining the business rather
mm,
than growing the business. And the reason why I say that is because growth brings added risk. A lot of entrepreneurs, I want growth all the time, right? I want 100x tomorrow, going to the moon. But they don't realize growth can be just as much of a killer as not making money. Because what happens if you do grow 100x and now you're making 100x in revenue? but you've also just 100x all your inefficiencies that are now big enough at scale to really do some damage to you. And I've seen
Mm,
that actually happen in businesses. So this is the double-edged sword of growth that no one talks about in entrepreneurship. Again, it's harder to do in affiliate marketing, but I've seen websites explode. I had a friend. He had a bunch of PBN links on his website this years ago. And by the way, I'm totally fine if people have PBN sites. We sell them, right? As
mhm.
long as you're being upfront about it. But he knew based off of our data that if he had PBN links, he would probably get on average a 10% less sales price than if he was all white hat. So he decided to
I know
go
where this
and
is
change.
going.
Yeah, he decided to spend about 6 months changing all the links to white hat links. Well, what happened, and this wasn't necessarily his fault because he couldn't control it, but there was an algorithm update that happened. So his business that was, I think it was around 400, 450K, was now closer to 250K that he ended up selling with us. So he lost all this money by taking away something that was core of his business just to get like a 10%
Mm,
higher valuation. So this is again how growth can be an enemy to you, right? Like trying to reach for that maximum price is not always a good idea. Like he would have been much happier with the 450 than the 250, yeah, right?
wow.
And for that 10% increase, it wasn't worth it. But these are some of the things to look at. Other things you can do as you get closer, say 3 months out from selling, that I think is quite important, is having a good set of SOPs, standard operating procedures. No one likes writing them. Everyone gets motivated on that one weekend. I'm going to do it, and they do it, and I'm going to keep it updated, but then they never do. And since most of us are solopreneurs, it's like, why do I need to update this? I know how my business runs. Like, well, the buyer doesn't. The buyer
Right.
doesn't know what you're doing, right? And they might be absolutely brand new to online business, right? Because affiliate marketing, affiliate websites in general are great assets for someone brand new because there's way less moving parts that they have to do. If someone's a busy professional working 9 to 5, buying an affiliate website is a lot more forgiving of a business model than an e-commerce store where you have to really be on point all the time, right? So this is a place where most newbie buyers start. So this will help you when you go to sell, is creating that SOP and updating the SOPs with how you do your processes now. So those are just some tips I would recommend.
Yeah, I agree. I'd love to meet the person who gets up on a Saturday morning and says, I have been waiting all week to write SOP. Man, pour me some coffee and let's get this thing going.
I'm going to be so organized.
Oh, man, sign me up. I'll be here all night.
It
I,
always sounds so good that you start doing it like, no,
oh, man, I'm
welcome
in for
back,
about
chaos.
minutes and then I'm like, how do I get out of this? I'm like a 5-year-old trying to figure out how to get out of my chores or something. On a serious note, I mean, I think it's come up multiple times. Whenever we have, I'll call it professionals in the asset sales business like yourself, like people who actually know what they're talking about. And the word risk comes up way more than growth. It's so intriguing and interesting to hear about how growth is not the priority for most of these buyers. It's all about risk mitigation. And they're evaluating these sites from a standpoint of, I don't want to buy something risky. And to hear you talk about how growth can actually involve risk never even occurred to me.
Yeah, yeah. So a good way of looking at, and most buyers don't obviously always think this way, but this is basically how a valuation is formed. You get a more premium valuation for the less risky your business is, not for its growth potential. The only business model where growth potential has a true effect on your valuation is SaaS.
Mm.
Software as a service, they do use growth as a valuation. That as part of their valuation. That's why they get insane multiples too, though. Because their valuations doesn't represent your typical annual EBITDA. When they say, "Oh, we're selling this business for 7x," they don't mean you're going to make your money back in 7 years. They mean like this business is growing like crazy. You're probably going to make it back in 2 years, right? But that's not the way most other businesses are valued. They're valued on profitable EBITDA. So, yeah, growth is a big risk. The less risky your business is, probably the more premium valuation you're going to get.
Let's switch over to talking about the asset flywheel, and I
Sure.
think it's a perfect segue because I don't want to over summarize maybe where a lot of people are, but I think we can get a little myopic as content creators, website builders, asset builders. We can get a little myopic thinking, okay, I have this website, I want to get it as big as I can, I want to sell it. I have this cash now. I want to go buy a site and and dive into things. You also touched on how it's really easy to get distracted. I think you mentioned in the buying businesses part, don't go buy businesses that are in different segments, stay
Yeah.
focused. And so all this comes back together maybe to underpin a challenge that happens in this industry, which is, little myopic in terms of our goals, in terms of how we think about the strategy. We bounce around a lot from one project to another. And when I watched your video on the asset flywheel, it kind of crystallized to me this underlying strategic challenge that we might have. Let's transition to talking about this approach that you spoke about, at least in the video I watched, and that we're going to talk about today.
Sure. So I coined the term asset flywheel. I stole a little bit from HubSpot's marketing flywheel to come up with the naming. But it's something I noticed over the years what our customers naturally do, some of them do. And that is they build up a business, they sell that business. And for a lot of them, that is life changing money. Like our friend who got the $1 million exit, right? That is life changing. Like
Right.
most people's retirement goals sit like a little bit above 2 million, right? So like to get that in 24 hours is amazing. But some sellers do, they'll take that money and that's how they become the buyer. So now they go buy $100,000, $200,000 website. So and they have the money. They actually have a budget for once, which is an unheard of thing for a bootstrap entrepreneur, right? When we're
Yeah.
like, like selling like recycled cans to like pay for our links or whatever, like doing
You
anything
sound
we
like
can
you've
to
done
get
that
something on the
before.
ground. For sure, I've been in the startup phase before. So like they actually have a budget to do these things. So I came up with this strategy. I like formalized it, and it's basically exactly what I just said. You build up a business, and this is like the whole point of it is to reach financial freedom. So whatever your fire goal is, like financial independence, retire early, it takes that frugality mindset of that industry, but applies it to entrepreneurship because entrepreneurs can't fire like a normal person would, just like investing in the index funds, because we're already doing the exact thing they tell you not to do, extremely risky investing, which is business, right? It's
Yeah.
like the most risky thing, but it also can give you
Starting
the
one at
biggest
that.
reward.
Yeah.
Right. So what you do is you want to get this flywheel going. Every single dollar has to be bent to the purpose of your goal, right? Even your net profit that's coming in every single month, the vast majority of that should be applied to your flywheel. And at the beginning, it moves very slow. But the first push of your flywheel is from that first sell of your business. And then you buy businesses rather than build them. You could build them from scratch too. You don't have to buy them in this strategy. But if you want to go fast, I highly recommend buying, because buying is a million times faster. Because if you have to start from scratch, you're in the sandbox for 12, 18, sometimes even longer months, right? With Google, versus if you buy a business, it's already out of the sandbox. It already has a proven market fit. It already has all the potential you need. It just needs a little bit more fuel on the fire, so to speak. And you just got that fuel from the capital you got from selling the business, right? So you're able to do this. You should already have all the processes because you just updated your SOPs when you right before you sold, right? So you already have the updated guidebook of what to do. And the cool thing with buying a business is you can sell them a lot faster than a business that you built from scratch, because
Hmm.
a business you built from scratch is usually going to be about 24 months old. Like that's a young business for us. Like we usually don't sell anything younger than that anymore. So if you buy a business and you hold on to it for a year, there's a lot you can do with that business because there's already so much data coming in from what the previous owner had, right? But at the end of that 12 months, you don't have a year-old business. You have a 3 or 4-year-old business. So you can literally sell it right then. There's a really funny story. This guy bought I think it was a $110,000 affiliate site from us, and there was a lot of competition for it. And it was in migrations, and he asked our customer service, like, "Hey, was there a lot of other offers on this business?" We're like, "Oh yeah, you beat out like 5 or 6 other people." It's like, "Are any of them still interested? I'll sell them to them right now for 120." And they're like, we'll check. And so we did, and someone bought it for 120. So he owned like this $110,000 website for like all of a few minutes, basically, right?
Oh man, that is arbitrage at its finest.
That is like the riskiest arbitrage in the world. But I've never seen that happen again. By the way, it's a one-time thing. I wouldn't recommend that as your strategy. But if that was a business built from scratch, there's no way you could have done that, right? Because there's
Right.
already the data, and that's why buying makes the asset flywheel go so much faster. So you do this for a period. I usually say 5 years. You'll end up flipping your businesses, I think about 3 times, 3 or 4 times. And by the end of the 5 years, you have built such a snowball of wealth. You have effectively fired yourself. You become financially independent, retire early, as long as you take the same kind of frugal mindset of that community and apply it to your entrepreneurial endeavors. It can like you can go to the moon. I have friends who have done this several times, who are now operating businesses in much more competitive spaces. That, and they're not necessarily affiliate sites anymore. They're like software or service companies, and much more lucrative too than the affiliates, because they get all of the commission instead of just like a percentage, right? But they would have never been able to compete unless they did this asset flywheel I'm talking about, to build up their own war chest to go into that market. They basically become like their own private equity in that sense. They raise the money from themselves.
Right. They're their own firm.
Right.
Let me ask you about your perspective or how it plays in to the asset flywheel, and this idea of maybe taking money off the table along the way.
Mhm.
That's a common phrase that gets said, and you'll ask someone, "Oh, why did you choose to sell this business, this website, this project?" And I'll say, well, "I was looking to take some money off the table." I mean, I think conceptually, what it is driving at is when we have these businesses, these online websites, they are inherently risky. Google can come along, and as they do, they can, change the playing field. And there's a whole other host of risks as well.
Right.
Amazon can cut commissions, and I'm just speaking about the affiliate space here. But how does taking money off the table play into the asset flywheel conceptually, and where do you think it is used well and maybe not used well?
It's a good question. So I think taking money off the table makes a lot of sense. So going back to my friend's story with the PBN links, like if you I always tell people, don't time the market by when you think you can get the maximum amount of price. You should be timing the market based off of your personal or your business goals. Like, ask yourself if that $400,000 will get you significantly closer to your personal and business goals, right? And if that's the case, would an extra 10% get you that significantly closer? Probably not, right? So it might make sense to sell that business. And when it comes to the asset flywheel, so let's say you the same example, 400K, that will get you significantly closer to your goal. You sell that business for 400K, you take 30K for yourself, you pay yourself, and now you have that remaining 370K to apply towards the asset flywheel. So I always recommend paying yourself first with everything you do. I think is that famous accounting style, profit first, right? I recommend that for entrepreneurs because, again, growth is something that could kill you, and the asset flywheel is something that is heavily growth related. So you don't
Right.
want to get to this point where you're just like toppling and leveraging up and up and up, and then a Google algorithm update comes, and at this point in the asset flywheel, you have just got $1 million website that's now $100,000. Like, this is terrible if you never paid yourself, right? So that's all part of the process. You should be taking chips off the table and start deleveraging. Now, when you first begin, that's very hard to do. When you first
Right.
begin, you need to leverage, you need to go hard. And by leveraging, I don't mean like taking out credit card debt. I just mean like
Right.
going hard and reinvesting and stuff, right? But as you grow, there needs to be phases in your business cycle where you deleverage yourself. So you de-risk yourself, that you take some chips home with you, right?
Okay, good. That's good to hear. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that plays nicely into my next question on this, which is risk. I'm trying to embrace what the experts like you talk about, risk. So when I first hear you talk about, let's buy a site, let's grow it, let's buy that, sell that site and buy another one, let's grow it, let's sell
Mhm.
that site, buy another one and grow it. The first thing that comes to mind for me is, man, I already struggle with due diligence and getting the first site right. Am I playing with the odds? Am I really, hoping to try to get three sites right in a row? What about the risk in the strategy of using the asset flywheel? And maybe touch on how people you've seen using this effectively mitigate that, or get around that.
Sure. So, one, you're at an advantage in that you sold a profitable website. So you know what made your site profitable, right? That already puts you at an advantage. Now, you may never have like advantage over someone who's never done that, right? It was just coming in as a buyer. So maybe you don't know enough about the buying side yet. So that's when I would recommend those tips I gave earlier, right? Splitting your budget down, whatever you pay yourself first from the sell, then take the remainder of that you want to dedicate to the asset flywheel. And it doesn't have to, you don't have to start off big. Like if you have that $400,000 exit, and you do give yourself say like 30 grand, that's just you money to do with whatever. That remaining 370K doesn't have to be used to go buy websites. Maybe you take 150K of that and put that into the 50K budget, 3 buckets of 50K, right? And then the remaining you might invest in, say, index funds and real estate, right? Because I do recommend diversifying your investments. I just don't recommend diversifying active investments like businesses, because that's very, very difficult for you to do. But that's what I would suggest. So
Yeah,
you can
that's a good way
de-risk
to look at
yourself
it.
along the way. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you mitigate the risk of this by not having all your assets as you grow in one risky area, which is this space of website buying and
Right.
selling. Yeah. Okay, that's very good. That's very good. One more question on this topic, because I think well, we just talked about it actually recently. Spencer and I did a podcast episode together where he talked about selling one of his website projects, Own the Yard. And we talked about this concept of taking your foot off the gas, and how it's common that or I don't know about common, but certainly it happens when you get this level of success with your website or with your business, that it's easier to kind of take the foot off the gas and maybe almost say like, oh, I'm going to start another website, or I'm going to start another project, instead of going all in on this concept. And, I think I just like to hear from you if you have any data or any stories, either anecdotally or from personal experience. Like, are the people who are buying and selling assets historically really good at going all in on one thing? Or do you see a lot of people succeeding with maybe starting at multiple projects and bringing one to sale now and one to sale later? And I'm really actually not trying to lead you with the question. I'm trying to get your honest take on that, and trying to maybe understand it better, because I think a lot of people think about these things as they're growing their assets.
Yeah, this is a very good question. I've seen it done actually in both ways. So earlier on in my career, it was definitely more of an assembly line thing when PBNs were all the rage, because it was a lot easier to control the links, and PBNs weren't as hard to mask as they are. Yeah, weren't as hard to mask as they are today. It's like way more complicated than it used to be.
Mm.
I will say in today's environment, I think most people are better with going all in on one website to begin with than multiple projects. And I think so I have a whole YouTube series called the 8-Figure Media Empire that I've just restarted it, but the first like 6 videos are live. And it's all about if you want to go really all in on an affiliate website, or as I call it, a content business,
Yeah.
most SEOs miss the boat, in my view. And this is why buyers are in a much better situation, because most SEOs, they think going all in is just like ranking and banking and doing nothing else with the website. But what they don't realize is they built a brochure, what I call a brochure website. So I'm walking down the street, you're walking down the street. I give you a brochure. What are you going to do with it? Well, you can open it and throw it away, open it and read it, maybe buy something from it, but you're still going to throw it away. Like no one keeps brochures unless it's like a weird hobby or something. I like collecting stamps, I guess, collecting brochures. But what I always suggest, if you want to go really big, is don't try to become a brochure website, become a magazine. So if I'm walking down the street, you're walking down the street, I give you a magazine, you might throw that magazine away, or you might read it, and you may or may not buy something, but you might actually really enjoy that magazine and come back to it. So SEO is the most valuable traffic in the world. That SEO, which makes most SEOs lazy on actually understanding how marketing works. They don't understand all the other principles behind copywriting, adding value, all this kind of stuff. So if you want to really go big, like the first step that could set you apart from almost like I'd probably wager 95% SEOs is just creating an email list and actually using the email list. Most people never use it.
Mhm.
So that's some of my advice there. I do think you're probably better served going all in on one website, especially in the beginning.
Boy, it would yeah, it's hard not to pull punches when it comes to maybe the one-sided approach that a classic SEO would take to a site. You're hit the nail on the head. And I do see sometimes I'll look at a listing and it's like, well, it has an email list of 2,000 people, but it's not active. It's like, well,
Right. Yeah. I have friends all the time like, hey, how much? And like, I have friends that literally put opt-ins on their website because they think I will value it
right.
more.
Well,
And then
that's what
like,
someone was just like, oh, I'll get emails and that'll just give me a better valuation. It's like, well, I don't really
right.
care about buying something that has no activity going for it anyways.
Yeah. Yeah, it like actually hurts your valuation because you would have been better off putting like a CTA to an Amazon link or something, right? And got that extra profit, and you would have gotten better valuation. Like, there's no point in building an email list if you're not going to use it.
Right, right. As we wrap up, what are there any things that we didn't talk about that you think are important? Any questions that I didn't ask, or any areas we didn't dive into that you think are really important for everyone to hear about?
Sure. So I want to say this is, well, part of what I'm going to say is kind of new, but the other part is like just something I truly believe in. And the first part is like this is the best sellers market I've ever seen ever in the over half a decade of working at EF. So right now, if you are looking to sell your business, it's an amazing time. You don't have to use me. I mean, Spencer has Motion Invest too, and there you can always you go privately, like whatever, right? As long as you don't time the market based off your valuation, you time it off personal business goals. And the other thing I'll say that I think that I have personally seen happen with sellers that I think is very emotionally fulfilling and something that your audience hopefully will one day experience as well is when you sell your business, you open up what I call the doors of possibilities, where things are now available to you that never were available, like what we were talking about with the asset flywheel, or getting into a more lucrative space, or retiring, and doing all this cool stuff, right? And I think one of the misconceptions, this is the insight I recently came to, a misconception on entrepreneurship in general, is people think if I become an entrepreneur, I am a master of my own fate, master of my own destiny. I, fire my boss, all that kind of stuff. But what they fail to realize is that dream has all these cracks in it, especially once you become successful. Because once you become successful, that's when the truth hits that, oh, I traded in this human boss for an inhuman boss called Google's algorithm. And this thing is way crueler. There's like, I can't even talk to it,
I can't
like,
even
there's
knock on its
nothing I can
door.
do. Right. And it's just destroying me. So you actually aren't the master of your own fate, but the dream of entrepreneurship, the promise of it does exist, but it exists after you sell the business, because that's when you divorce yourself from all of the ownership of those algorithms, right? You do cash out on your equity. And I just think it's a good thing to keep in mind as we're toiling away in the SEO jungle, that it's all worth it in the end. I've seen so many entrepreneurs who have just changed their life radically in so many positive ways from the seller business. I think that's really cool.
Whew. This is one of those episodes that I feel like I need to go now, have a cup of coffee and rethink everything I'm doing, and have a second cup of coffee and write SOP out. But first, rethink everything I'm
Yes.
doing. Yeah, I think I'll close by saying it's really easy to get, stuck in the day to day, right? Like, and not think strategically about how all these things play together. It's very hard to be thinking about an update you need to make to an article that used to rank number one and now ranks number three, and in the same time think about the asset flywheel approach and the next three sites that I'm going to buy and sell, and then buy and then sell to grow into something that is true wealth, right? And so these kind of episodes are a good reminder. I hope everybody does. Maybe, take a break, come back, listen to this again, pour themselves a cup of coffee, have a notepad, and start thinking a little bit bigger picture about how they want to achieve their goals and their wealth based on these assets that are, like you said, growing faster and faster and selling at higher and higher multiples than ever before.
For sure. It is an exciting time.
Well, we'll include, how can people keep up with you? We'll include that in the show notes. Obviously,
Sure.
empireflippers.com is kind of the base website that you guys operate out of, but anywhere else you want to direct people to?
Sure. If your audience wants to ask me any questions, they can either email me, greg@empireflippers.com. They can add me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on both. And if you want to support my YouTube adventures, you can just go to youtube.com/empireflippers. And I talk about marketing, online business, M&A, all that kind of stuff on there.
Perfect. Okay, yeah, we're going to include a link to that asset flywheel video that you did as well. So
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So
yeah,
you'll have the link to it.
you'll
to
have
watch.
that. So just
Give me
poke
that watch
around and get
time.
lost. Yeah. Good. Greg, thank you so much for joining us here on the Niche Pursuits podcast. It's been a real treat. Thank you for sharing so many wonderful tips and tricks.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
All right, until next time.